The transport ship Meridian Dawn shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of the emergency jump. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the small porthole, watching the alien star system unfold before them. 3 suns burned in the distance, casting strange orange and purple light across space. This wasn't supposed to be their destination. "Captain Morrison, we need to talk," Sarah said, turning from the window. The bridge was cramped, barely large enough for the essential crew. Morrison stood behind the pilot's chair, his weathered face grim as he studied the navigation displays. "Not now, Chen. We've got bigger problems." Morrison's voice carried the weight of command, but Sarah heard something else underneath, fear, maybe even panic. "Sir, with respect, this is exactly when we need to talk. My team wasn't supposed to be on this ship. We were scheduled for transport to Europa Station, not some deep space mission to God knows where." Morrison finally looked at her, his gray eyes cold. "Plans change, Commander. The Colonial Defense Corps has new priorities." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She'd been a military engineer for 12 years, had worked on terraforming projects across 3 star systems, but something about this felt wrong. Very wrong. What kind of priorities require kidnapping a civilian engineering team? "You're not civilians anymore. As of 6 hours ago, you and your people were conscripted under Emergency Protocol 7. The war with the hegemony has escalated." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The hegemony, humanity's first contact with an alien species, and it had gone about as badly as possible. For 3 years, they'd been fighting a losing war against creatures that seemed to understand human technology better than humans did. Ships disappeared, colonies went dark, and Earth's military was stretched beyond breaking point. "That still doesn't explain why we're here wherever here is," Sarah said. She gestured toward the view screen where the alien suns continued their cosmic dance. "This system isn't on any charts I know." Morrison's jaw tightened. "It's called Kepler 442. The eggheads at command think it might be a hegemony staging area. Your job is to assess whether we can establish a forward base here." "A forward base?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Captain, my team designs water purification systems and atmospheric processors. We're not military strategists." "You'll learn fast or we'll all die trying." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp alarm. Ensign Rodriguez at the sensor station turned toward them, his face pale. "Captain, I'm reading multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Big ones." Morrison cursed under his breath and moved to the central display. Sarah followed, her engineering mind automatically processing what she saw. The contacts were massive, each one easily 3 times the size of the asterisk Meridian Dawn asterisk. They moved with purpose, forming what looked like a classic encirclement pattern. "Hegemony?" Morrison asked. "Has to be, sir. Energy signatures match previous encounters." Sarah watched the tactical display update in real time. The alien ships were beautiful in a terrifying way, organic curves that seemed to flow like living tissue, yet clearly artificial. She'd seen recordings of them before, but seeing them in person was different. They seemed to pulse with malevolent life. "Options," Morrison barked. "Not many, sir. We're outnumbered 6-1 and they've got us surrounded. Our weapons are defensive at best, and hyperspace is being jammed." Morrison stared at the display for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "Commander Chen, get your people to the escape pods, now." "What, Captain, you can't seriously be." "That's an order, Commander. Take your team and get to the surface of that planet." He pointed to a blue-green world visible through the main viewport. "Find a way to survive down there. Maybe Command will send a rescue mission when they realize we're missing." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. "You're abandoning us just like that." "I'm saving what I can," Morrison said. "My ship can't outrun them, but those pods might make it through the atmosphere before they notice. It's the only chance any of us have." The ship shuddered again, this time from enemy fire. Warning lights bathed the bridge in red as the asterisk Meridian Dawn returned fire with everything it had. Through the viewport, Sarah could see energy beams lancing back and forth between the human and alien vessels. "Go," Morrison shouted. "That's a direct order." Sarah ran. The corridors of the transport ship were chaos, crew members racing to battle stations, emergency lighting flickering, the constant rumble of weapons fire. She found her team gathered in their quarters, faces confused and frightened. Pack light and move fast, she told them. We're evacuating to the planet's surface. Dr. James Webb, her second-in-command, looked up from where he'd been organizing equipment. Sarah, what's happening? Nobody's told us anything since we left Earth. Later, James. Right now we need to get to the escape pods before this ship comes apart around us. Her team moved with the efficiency she'd come to expect from them. Marcus Rodriguez, their atmospheric specialist, grabbed emergency rations and basic survival gear. Dr. Lisa Park, their chief biologist, snatched up sample containers and analysis equipment. Tommy Chen, no relation, despite the shared last name, was their electronics expert, and he gathered communication equipment and power cells. They reached the escape pod bay just as another massive impact shook the ship. Through the small portholes, Sarah could see one of the hegemony vessels closing in, its weapons charging for what looked like a killing blow. Everyone in, she ordered, sealing the pod's hatch behind them. The interior was cramped, designed for short-range evacuations, not planetary landings. Strap in tight, this is going to be rough. She initiated the launch sequence. Hopping the ship's automated systems would give them a clean trajectory to the planet below. Through the pod's rear camera, she watched the Meridian Dawn continue its desperate fight. Morrison was buying them time with his life. The pod ejected with a violent kick that pressed them deep into their acceleration couches. G-forces built as they fell toward the alien world, the pod's heat shield glowing cherry red as they hit the upper atmosphere. Sarah fought to stay conscious as the blood drained from her brain, watching the altimeter spin down toward the surface. Sarah, James gasped between gritted teeth. The landing system, something's wrong. She forced her eyes to focus on the control panel. He was right, the landing rockets weren't firing on schedule. They were coming in too fast, too steep. The pod shook violently as it plowed through increasingly thick atmosphere, its hull groaning under stresses it was never designed to handle. "Brace for impact," Sarah shouted. The pod hit the ground like a meteor, bouncing twice before sliding to a stop in what felt like soft earth. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Tommy started laughing, high, stressed laughter that bordered on hysteria. "We're alive," Lisa said, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually made it." Sarah unbuckled her restraints and moved to the pod's small viewport. Outside was an alien landscape unlike anything she'd ever seen. The sky was a deep purple, lit by the triple suns that painted everything in strange, shifting colors. Massive trees stretched toward the heavens, their trunks twisted in impossible spirals, their leaves a riot of silver and gold. In the distance, she could see mountains that seemed to float above the ground, connected to the surface by waterfalls that flowed upward instead of down. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely impossible by human understanding of physics. "Where are we?" Marcus asked, pressing his face to another viewport. "Somewhere we were never meant to be," Sarah replied. She began checking the pod systems, taking inventory of their supplies. They had food for maybe 2 weeks, water for less than that. The pod's communication array was damaged from the rough landing, and the power cells wouldn't last more than a few days. "What happened to the ship?" Tommy asked quietly. Sarah looked back through the rear viewport, but the Meridian Dawn was no longer visible in the sky. Either it had escaped or it had been destroyed. Either way, they were on their own. "We need to assume we're here for the long haul," she said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Our first priority is finding water and shelter. Then we figure out how to survive on an alien world that doesn't follow our rules of physics." James was studying readings from the pod's environmental sensors. "The atmosphere is breathable, barely. Oxygen content is about 15%. We'll get tired fast, but we won't suffocate. Gravity is about 0.8 Earth normal. Temperature outside is holding steady at 22 degrees Celsius. "Could be worse," Marcus said. "At least we won't freeze to death." Sarah was already forming plans. As the team's commander, keeping them alive was her responsibility. But more than that, she was an engineer. Problems existed to be solved, no matter how impossible they seemed. And right now, their biggest problem was simple: survive long enough to find a way home. She opened the pod's emergency locker and began distributing supplies. Each team member got a survival pack with basic tools, water purification tablets, and emergency rations. Not much to work with, but it would have to be enough. "Listen up," Sarah said, settling into command mode. We're going to do this by the numbers. First, we establish a perimeter around the pod and make sure nothing nasty is lurking in those trees. Then we find water. That stream over there looks promising. After that, we build shelter and figure out our next move. What if the hegemony comes looking for us? Lisa asked. Then we hide and we hope they're as confused by this place as we are. Sarah sealed her survival pack and moved toward the pod's exit hatch. But right now, alien invaders are the least of our problems. This world is going to try to kill us just by existing. Our job is to not let it. She opened the hatch and stepped onto alien soil for the first time. The ground was soft under her feet, almost spongy, and covered with what looked like grass but felt more like rubber. The air smelled of ozone and something floral, almost overwhelming after the recycled atmosphere of the pod. Above them, the three suns continued their dance across the purple sky, and in the distance, those impossible floating mountains defied everything Sarah thought she knew about geology and physics. But she was an engineer, and engineers solved problems, starting with the most immediate one, staying alive. The first 24 hours would be critical. If they could survive that long, maybe they could survive long enough to matter. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to turn their impossible situation into an advantage. After all, if this place confused them, it would probably confuse the hegemony too. As her team emerged from the pod behind her, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected: determination. They might be abandoned on an alien world with no hope of rescue, but they were humans. And humans had a long history of surviving in impossible places. This would just be the most impossible place yet. 3 days into their exile, Sarah Chen was beginning to understand why this world made no sense. The problem wasn't that it followed different physical laws. It was that it followed all of them at once, somehow. The water flows upward because of magnetic fields, Marcus reported from his position beside the impossible waterfall they discovered that morning. But it also flows downward because of gravity. Somehow it's doing both simultaneously. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead and studied the readings on Tommy's makeshift scanner. Her team had worked miracles in just 3 days, cobbling together scientific instruments from the pod's spare electronics. What they'd discovered challenged everything she thought she knew about reality. "That shouldn't be possible," James said for the 100th time. He'd been saying it a lot lately. "And yet there it is," Lisa replied, not looking up from her sample analysis. "I've found 17 different species of plant life in this immediate area. 15 of them shouldn't be able to exist in this atmosphere, 2 of them shouldn't be able to exist anywhere, and 3 of them appear to be slowly becoming something else entirely while I watch." The camp they'd established around the escape pod was starting to look like a proper research station. Sarah had insisted on building defensible positions first, earthworks and improvised barriers that could stop anything from getting too close to their shelter. But as the days passed without any sign of hostile life, they'd expanded into a proper scientific outpost. It was Tommy who first suggested that they might be looking at the situation wrong. "What if this isn't an alien world?" he said during their evening briefing. The triple suns were setting, painting the sky in colors that had no names. "What if it's some kind of testing ground?" "Testing ground for what?" Sarah asked. "For us. Think about it, we crash land on a planet that should kill us immediately, but instead it's perfectly habitable. The physics are impossible, but not in ways that hurt us. Everything here is just strange enough to be fascinating, but not dangerous enough to be immediately lethal." Marcus looked up from the water purification system he'd been assembling. "You're talking about some kind of artificial environment, like a zoo." "Or a laboratory," Lisa added quietly. The idea sent chills down Sarah's spine, but she couldn't dismiss it. The more they learned about this place, the less sense it made as a natural world. The floating mountains weren't held up by any force they could measure. They simply existed in defiance of gravity. The plants grew in patterns that suggested intelligent design rather than natural selection. Even the weather seemed carefully controlled, maintaining perfect conditions for human survival. "If that's true," Sarah said slowly, "then someone or something put us here deliberately. The question is why." That night she lay in her improvised shelter listening to the alien sounds of their new world. In the distance, something that might have been singing echoed off the floating mountains. The song was hauntingly beautiful, almost human in its melody, but with undertones that suggested a mind completely unlike anything from Earth. When morning came, they found their first proof that they weren't alone. Sarah, Tommy's voice cracked with excitement as he burst into the main shelter. You need to see this, right now. She followed him to the edge of their camp, where the others had already gathered. There, pressed into the soft ground, was a footprint, but it wasn't like any footprint Sarah had ever seen. The print was roughly human-sized, but with 6 toes arranged in a perfect circle around a central pad. The depth and clarity suggested something much heavier than a human, but the spacing between prints indicated a bipedal creature with a normal walking gait. How old? Sarah asked. Fresh, Marcus replied. Made sometime during the night. Whatever left this walked right through our camp while we were sleeping. Sarah felt her blood run cold. They'd been so focused on the scientific mysteries of this world that they'd forgotten the most basic rule of survival. Assume everything is dangerous until proven otherwise. Did anyone hear anything, see anything? The team shook their heads. Whatever had visited them had been completely silent, completely invisible. It had walked among them while they slept, examined their camp, and left without disturbing so much as a single piece of equipment. Could be reconnaissance, James suggested. Something checking us out before deciding whether we're a threat. Or prey, Lisa added unhelpfully. Sarah studied the footprint more carefully. The pad was smooth, almost polished, and there were what looked like symbols carved into the surface. No, not carved. They seemed to be part of the creature's natural anatomy, like permanent tattoos grown into the skin. Tommy, can you get photos of these markings? Full spectrum if possible. While Tommy worked, Sarah organized a proper security sweep of the camp. They'd been sloppy, too focused on their scientific discoveries to pay attention to basic survival protocols. That ended now. New rules, she announced. 24-hour watch rotation, minimum 2 people awake at all times. Nobody goes anywhere alone, and nobody goes more than 50 meters from the pod without checking in every 15 minutes. This isn't a research station anymore, it's a survival situation. As if summoned by her words, the singing started again. But this time it was closer, much closer. And there was something different about it, a complex harmony that suggested multiple voices working together. There, Lisa whispered, pointing toward the twisted trees at the edge of their clearing. Sarah followed her gaze and felt her breath catch. Something was moving among the trees, something tall and graceful that seemed to flow rather than walk. She caught glimpses of it between the silver-gold leaves' pale skin that reflected the triple sunlight, limbs that were too long and moved in ways that defied human anatomy. And it was watching them. Nobody move, Sarah said quietly. Nobody make any sudden gestures, we don't know if it's hostile. The creature stepped out of the trees, and Sarah's scientific mind struggled to process what she was seeing. It was humanoid, but clearly not human, nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and a head that seemed to shift between different shapes depending on the angle of view. Its skin was translucent, showing complex patterns beneath the surface that might have been circulatory systems or decorative markings. But it was the eyes that captured Sarah's attention. They were large, multifaceted like an insect's, but with a depth of intelligence that was unmistakably conscious. When the creature looked at her, she had the unsettling feeling that it was seeing straight through to her soul. The creature raised one of its 4 hands, and Sarah tensed for attack. Instead, it touched its throat, and the singing stopped. Then it spoke, and what it said made Sarah's world shift beneath her feet. Welcome, humans, to the testing ground of the first makers. Your arrival was anticipated, though your method of arrival was improvised. The words were in perfect English, delivered in a voice that sounded like wind chimes mixed with whale song. Beautiful and alien and completely impossible. You speak our language, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. The creature's head tilted in what might have been amusement. We speak all languages, Dr. Webb. Communication is one of the gifts the first makers left us when they departed. Sarah found her voice. The first makers, who are they? Where are they? Gone, these many cycles passed, but they left instructions for those who would come after, specific instructions regarding your species. The creature moved closer, and Sarah noticed that its feet left the same circular prints they'd found that morning. But now she could see the symbols more clearly. They weren't random markings, but some kind of written language, constantly shifting and changing as she watched. My designation translates roughly as Keeper of the New Paths. You may call me Keeper if it pleases you. I have been waiting for your kind to arrive for 300 of your years. Waiting for us specifically? Sarah asked. How could you know we were coming? The first makers were very good at reading the patterns of time. They saw that humanity would spread to the stars, and they saw that you would need a place to learn the truths that your current understanding cannot encompass. Tommy stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overwhelming his caution. What kind of truths? The keeper's multifaceted eyes focused on him, and Tommy involuntarily stepped back. The truth that reality is far more flexible than your species believes. The truth that consciousness shapes existence as much as existence shapes consciousness. The truth that the universe is vast enough to contain impossibilities. Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. This world, it's artificial, isn't it? The impossible physics, the perfect conditions for our survival. Someone built this place. Not built, the keeper corrected. Grown, shaped, convinced to exist in a particular way. The first makers understood that reality is more suggestion than law. They created this place as a school for those who would learn to move beyond the limitations of conventional physics. And you're our teacher? Lisa asked. I am one teacher of many. The real teachers are the challenges this world will present to you. My role is simply to ensure you do not die before you have learned what you came here to learn. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. We didn't come here by choice, we were abandoned here by circumstances. The keeper's head shifted through several different shapes before settling on something almost human in appearance. Were you? Commander Chen, what were the exact odds that your transport ship would be attacked in precisely the location it was attacked, forcing an emergency jump to precisely this star system, resulting in exactly the right trajectory to deposit you exactly where we needed you to be? Sarah felt cold despite the warm alien air. You're saying this was planned, that our ship was attacked deliberately to get us here. I am saying that the patterns of time are complex, and those who learn to read them can occasionally nudge events toward desired outcomes. Your Captain Morrison chose to save your lives by sending you to this world, but perhaps his choice was influenced by factors he was not consciously aware of. The revelation was staggering. They hadn't been abandoned at all, they'd been recruited. But recruited for what? What is it you want from us? Sarah demanded. Nothing, the keeper replied. Everything. The first makers left this place for humanity because they believed your species possessed a unique quality, the ability to adapt to impossible circumstances and not merely survive them, but transform them into opportunities. And if we don't want to be part of your experiment? The keeper gestured toward the purple sky, where no trace of human civilization was visible. Then you are free to leave at any time. Of course, the nearest human settlement is approximately 47,000 light-years away, and the methods of travel available to you at your current level of development would require roughly 2 million years to complete the journey. So we're prisoners. You are students. The difference is that a prisoner dreams of escape, while a student dreams of graduation. The keeper began to move away from their camp, flowing back toward the twisted trees, but it paused at the edge of the clearing and turned back to face them. Your first lesson begins at the next sunset, when the three suns align and this world shows you one of its deeper mysteries. I suggest you spend the time between now and then deciding whether you wish to remain as you are or become something more than you ever imagined possible. As the alien creature disappeared into the forest, Sarah looked around at her team. 4 humans, abandoned on an impossible world, being offered a choice between remaining human or becoming something else entirely. The smart choice would be to refuse, to focus on basic survival and hope for eventual rescue. But Sarah was an engineer, and engineers were driven by one fundamental truth. When faced with the impossible, the only rational response was to engineer a solution, even if that solution required them to evolve beyond what they had always been. The three suns began their alignment as Sarah's team gathered at the edge of the floating mountains. The keeper had been right about one thing. This world definitely had deeper mysteries to reveal. Energy readings are off the charts, Tommy reported, his cobbled-together scanner practically vibrating in his hands. Whatever's about to happen, it's going to be big. Sarah checked her watch. 6 hours had passed since the keeper's visit, and her team had spent every minute debating their situation. James wanted to reject whatever was being offered to focus on finding a way home. Marcus was fascinated by the implications of reality-shaping technology. Lisa was torn between scientific curiosity and basic human survival instincts. Tommy, predictably, wanted to dive headfirst into whatever came next. "Commander," he'd said during their heated discussion, "we're talking about the chance to learn how reality actually works. Do you know what humanity could accomplish if we understood how to bend physics the way these first makers did?" "I know what we could accomplish if we survive long enough to use that knowledge," Sarah had replied, but privately she was as curious as he was. Now, standing beneath the alien sky as three suns moved into perfect alignment, she felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Whatever was about to happen would change everything for her team. The question was whether that change would be evolution or destruction. There, Lisa pointed toward the floating mountains. "Something's happening." The mountains were beginning to glow. Not reflected sunlight, this was something deeper, an illumination that seemed to come from within the rock itself. As Sarah watched, patterns became visible on the mountain surfaces, intricate geometric designs that pulsed with increasing brightness. "Those aren't natural formations," Marcus breathed. "They're machines, massive ancient machines." The keeper materialized beside them with no warning, appearing as if reality had simply decided to include the alien creature in their location. The first makers built many wonders, but their greatest achievement was the integration of consciousness with physical law. What you are about to witness is a demonstration of directed reality. "Directed reality?" Sarah asked. "The process by which conscious intent shapes the fundamental structure of existence. Your species currently believes that consciousness arises from matter. The truth is far more interesting. Matter arises from consciousness and can be reshaped by sufficiently focused will." As the keeper spoke, the floating mountains began to move, not drifting randomly, but with clear purpose and direction. They rearranged themselves into a perfect circle high above the surface, their glow intensifying until the entire sky blazed with golden light. "This is impossible," James muttered. "You can't just move mountains with willpower." The keeper's multifaceted eyes focused on him. "Dr. Webb, you are a geologist. Tell me, what is the difference between a mountain and a very large rock?" "Scale, composition, geological formation processes. All classifications created by conscious minds. Remove the consciousness that categorizes and what remains." James opened his mouth to reply, then closed it again. Sarah could see him struggling with concepts that threatened to overturn everything he thought he knew about the universe. The mountains completed their circular formation and began to spin slowly around their common center. As they moved, the air itself began to shimmer, as if reality was becoming unstable in their vicinity. "Focus your attention on the center of the circle," the keeper instructed. "But do not try to understand what you see with your current framework of knowledge. Instead, allow your consciousness to expand beyond its current limitations." Sarah did as instructed, and immediately felt something shift in her perception. The empty space at the center of the spinning mountains wasn't empty at all. It was full of potential, crackling with possibilities that existed in a state of quantum superposition. She could sense countless realities overlapping, waiting for conscious observation to collapse them into a single truth. "Now," the keeper said, "choose what you wish to see." "Choose?" Sarah asked. "Reality at the quantum level exists in a state of probability until consciousness observes it and forces it to select a specific state. The first makers learned to extend this principle to the macro scale. Within that circle, probability has been amplified. Your conscious intent can literally shape what comes into existence." Sarah felt a moment of vertigo as the implications hit her. "You're saying we can create reality just by thinking about it?" "Within limits and with practice. The process requires absolute clarity of intent, complete confidence in the outcome, and the ability to perceive reality as fluid rather than fixed. Most species never develop this capability because they are too invested in the illusion that physical laws are immutable." Tommy stepped forward, his eyes bright with fascination. "Can I try?" Before Sarah could object, Tommy focused his attention on the center of the mountain circle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shimmering air began to solidify, forming shapes that flickered between possibilities. "I'm thinking of home," Tommy said, his voice strained with concentration. "Earth, my apartment in New York." The shapes became more solid, more defined. Sarah watched in amazement as a perfect replica of a New York apartment materialized in midair, complete down to the smallest details. She could see books on shelves, pictures on walls, even a half-empty coffee cup on a kitchen counter. "Remarkable," the keeper said. "Most students require weeks of training before achieving such precision." But the apartment was already beginning to fade, the image dissolving back into probability clouds. Tommy staggered backward, sweat beading on his forehead. "Why didn't it stay?" he asked. "Because part of your mind knew it was impossible," the keeper explained. "True reality shaping requires complete conviction. Any doubt, any subconscious belief that what you are creating cannot exist will cause the projection to collapse." Sarah stared at the space where Tommy's apartment had been. "This is how you maintain this world, how you keep the floating mountains aloft, how you make water flow upward. You believe it's possible, so it is." "More than belief," the keeper corrected. "Knowledge, understanding. The first makers didn't simply believe that reality was flexible, they understood the fundamental mechanisms by which consciousness interacts with quantum probability fields." Lisa was studying her biological scanner with a puzzled expression. "I'm reading massive neural activity from the mountains themselves. It's almost like they're alive." "In a sense, they are. The first makers didn't build passive machines. They grew reality-shaping organisms that could maintain conscious intent across vast spans of time. Each mountain contains a distributed consciousness network that continuously shapes local physics according to predetermined parameters." Marcus looked up from his own instruments. "The energy requirements for this must be enormous." "Energy is another construct that consciousness can reshape," the keeper said. "The first makers learned to tap directly into the quantum vacuum, extracting unlimited power from the zero-point field that underlies all existence." Sarah felt her engineering mind struggling to process these concepts. Everything the keeper was describing violated fundamental conservation laws, yet she was seeing the evidence with her own eyes. "Why show us this?" she asked. "What do the first makers want from humanity?" The keeper's form shifted, becoming more recognizably humanoid. "They foresaw a time when your species would face challenges that conventional physics could not address. The war with the hegemony is only the beginning. There are older threats stirring in the deep places between stars, entities that exist primarily as information patterns rather than matter." Information patterns. Consciousness without physical substrate. Minds that have transcended biological limitations and achieved a form of existence your current science cannot even conceptualize. When they arrive in your galaxy, conventional weapons will be useless against them. Only those who understand reality shaping will be able to stand against them. The weight of this revelation settled over Sarah's team like a suffocating blanket. They weren't just being offered an education. They were being recruited as humanity's defense against threats that hadn't even arrived yet. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. "By your calendar, approximately 47 years until the first scouts arrive. Perhaps another century before the full incursion begins. Enough time to prepare if your species proves capable of learning." The three suns completed their alignment overhead, and the mountain circle began to slow its rotation. As it did, the reality distortion field at its center gradually stabilized, returning to normal space-time. "Your first lesson is complete," the keeper announced. "You have seen that reality is far more malleable than your species currently believes. Your second lesson will begin when you are ready to attempt conscious reality shaping yourselves." "What does that involve?" James asked, his scientific curiosity finally overcoming his caution. "Learning to see through the illusion of fixed physical laws. Understanding that you are not separate from the universe you observe, but integral parts of its ongoing creation. Most importantly, developing the confidence to act upon that understanding." Sarah looked around at her team, seeing the mixture of fear, excitement, and determination in their faces. They'd come here as abandoned refugees, but they were being offered the chance to become something unprecedented in human history, conscious architects of reality itself. "If we do this," Sarah said carefully, "if we learn what you're teaching, can we go home? Can we help our own species prepare for what's coming?" The keeper's multifaceted eyes seemed to sparkle with something that might have been approval. "Commander Chen, that is precisely what the first makers hoped you would ask. Yes, when your training is complete, you will return to human space. But you will return changed, carrying knowledge that could transform your entire civilization. And if we fail, if we can't learn these techniques, then you will live comfortable lives on a beautiful world, tended by automated systems until you die of old age. The choice is yours to make. Sarah looked at the floating mountains, still glowing faintly in the light of the three suns. She thought about the war raging across human space, about the millions of people dying while aliens tore apart everything humanity had built among the stars. She thought about the impossible apartment Tommy had created with nothing but focused thought, and the implications of that power in human hands. Most of all, she thought about what it meant to be human, the drive to adapt, to overcome, to transform insurmountable challenges into opportunities for growth. "When do we start?" she asked. The keeper's form brightened, becoming almost luminous. "Tomorrow, when the suns rise, you will begin learning to reshape reality with conscious intent. But tonight, you should rest and prepare your minds for concepts that will challenge everything you believe about existence." As the alien teacher faded back into the forest, Sarah gathered her team for what might be their last night as ordinary humans. Tomorrow, they would begin learning to become something more. The question was whether humanity was ready for what they might become. 3 weeks into their training, Sarah Chen stood at the edge of a cliff that hadn't existed an hour earlier, watching Tommy attempt to teach a boulder the fundamental principles of flight. "Focus on the relationship between mass and gravity," the keeper instructed from its position floating serenely 10 meters above the ground. "Do not think of the rock as heavy. Think of heaviness as a choice the rock has made and convince it to choose differently." Tommy's face was screwed up in concentration, sweat beading on his forehead despite the mild temperature. The boulder, a chunk of granite roughly the size of a small car, trembled slightly but remained stubbornly planted on the ground. "This is insane," James muttered from where he sat attempting his own exercise. His task was supposedly simpler: convince a flower to bloom in a specific color. So far, he'd managed to produce blooms in 17 different shades, none of them the basic red the keeper had requested. "Insanity is a judgment call," Lisa replied without looking up from her work. She was trying to persuade a small stream to flow in a perfect spiral pattern and was actually making progress. The water was moving in increasingly complex curves, defying both gravity and fluid dynamics with casual ease. Sarah was working on the most challenging exercise of all: learning to perceive reality as the keeper did. This involved what the alien teacher called consciousness expansion, allowing her awareness to extend beyond the boundaries of her physical body and sense the quantum probability fields that underlied all existence. It was harder than it sounded. Every time she felt her perception beginning to expand, her rational mind kicked in with reminders of how impossible the whole thing was. The keeper had told her this was the primary obstacle facing human students. They were too rational, too committed to the idea that reality followed fixed rules. "Your species has achieved remarkable things through logical analysis," the keeper had explained during their second week. "But logic is a tool, not a prison. To reshape reality, you must learn to think beyond the boundaries of what you currently believe possible." Marcus had been the first breakthrough. 5 days ago, he'd successfully convinced a patch of grass to grow in a perfect mathematical spiral, each blade positioned according to the Fibonacci sequence. The accomplishment had left him giddy with excitement and profoundly unsettled at the same time. "It felt like the grass wanted to grow that way," he'd explained afterward. "Like I was just showing it a possibility it hadn't considered before." Now Sarah watched her atmospheric specialist work with a small cloud, gradually reshaping it into increasingly complex forms. The cloud seemed to enjoy the exercise, responding eagerly to Marcus's suggestions, and even adding its own creative variations to the patterns he suggested. "The key insight," the keeper had told them, "is that consciousness exists at every level of reality. Atoms have a form of awareness, as do molecules, cells, organisms, and planetary systems. Reality shaping is not about imposing your will on unconscious matter, but about communicating with the consciousness that exists within all things." Sarah had struggled with this concept until she'd seen Lisa's breakthrough with the stream. Instead of trying to force the water to behave differently, Lisa had started talking to it, literally speaking aloud to the flowing stream, explaining what she wanted and why. The stream had responded like a friendly pet, eager to please. Consciousness recognizes consciousness, the keeper had said approvingly. When you approach reality as a living system rather than dead matter, it becomes much more cooperative. Today's lesson was different, though. Instead of individual exercises, they were being taught group reality shaping. The keeper had explained that collective consciousness was exponentially more powerful than individual awareness, but also much harder to coordinate. 5 human minds working in perfect harmony can reshape matter on a massive scale, the alien teacher had said. But achieving that harmony requires absolute trust and complete synchronization of intent. Sarah called her team together in the center of their practice area. Around them, the impossible landscape of the training world continued its casual defiance of conventional physics. Floating stones drifted past like lazy clouds, a waterfall flowed upward into the purple sky, and in the distance, a forest of crystal trees chimed musical harmonies in the alien breeze. "All right, everyone," Sarah said, settling into her role as team leader. "The Keeper wants us to attempt collective reality shaping. Our target is that valley over there." She pointed to a small depression in the landscape, currently filled with nothing but ordinary grass and flowers. "What are we supposed to do with it?" Tommy asked. "Turn it into a lake. A real one, not just an illusion. The Keeper says if we can manage this, we'll be ready for the next level of training." James looked skeptical. "A lake, as in we're supposed to create water from nothing." "Not from nothing," Marcus corrected. The Keeper explained that reality shaping doesn't violate conservation laws. It redirects existing matter and energy according to conscious intent. We're not creating water, we're convincing existing moisture to condense and collect in the valley. Lisa nodded. "It's like reality is more of a suggestion than a law. We're just making a different suggestion about how things should be arranged." Sarah took a deep breath and extended her consciousness the way the Keeper had taught her. Immediately, she could sense the awareness of her teammates, their minds glowing like warm lights in the quantum field that surrounded them. She could also sense the potential lake, not as it was, but as it could become. "Link up," she said quietly. One by one, her team members extended their own awareness and connected with hers. The sensation was indescribable. Suddenly, Sarah wasn't just herself anymore, but part of something larger and more capable than any individual consciousness. She could feel Tommy's enthusiasm, Marcus's analytical precision, Lisa's intuitive understanding of natural systems, and James's deep knowledge of geological processes. Together, they focused on the valley. Sarah could sense the water molecules scattered throughout the atmosphere above it, the underground streams that flowed far beneath the surface, even the trace amounts of moisture locked in the soil itself. It was all there, waiting to be convinced to relocate. "Now," Sarah whispered. 5 minds working as one reached out to the scattered water and made a simple request. "Please come together in this place, in this new form." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Water began to condense out of the air, streams diverted their courses to flow into the valley, underground springs burst to the surface in dozens of places. Within minutes, what had been a dry depression was filling with clear, cool water. But the team wasn't finished. Working together, they shaped the lake's borders, convinced fish from nearby streams to take up residence in their creation, even encouraged aquatic plants to begin growing along the shoreline. When they finally released their collective focus, Sarah staggered backward in exhaustion. Creating a lake out of nothing had required more mental energy than she'd thought possible. But there it was, a perfect mountain lake where none had existed before, complete with its own ecosystem. "Extraordinary," the Keeper said, appearing beside them with its usual casual disregard for normal space-time. "Most students require months of training before achieving such coordination. Your species appears to have a natural aptitude for collective consciousness." Tommy was grinning like a madman. "Did you see that? We just created a lake, an actual lake." "We didn't create it," Lisa corrected, but she was grinning too. "We convinced it to create itself. The water wanted to be there, we just showed it where there was." The Keeper's multifaceted eyes gleamed with something that might have been pride. "You are beginning to understand. Reality is not a fixed system that consciousness must work within, but a collaborative process in which consciousness participates. The first makers learned this truth and used it to reshape entire star systems according to their vision." Sarah felt a chill despite her excitement. "Star systems? You're talking about engineering on a galactic scale." The threats I mentioned are not small things that can be fought with conventional weapons. When information-based entities arrive in your galaxy, they will attempt to remake reality according to their own preferences. Unless your species learns to contest their reality-shaping abilities, they will transform your entire region of space into something hostile to biological life. The implications were staggering. Sarah tried to imagine beings capable of reshaping star systems with conscious thought and failed. The scale was simply too vast for her human mind to encompass. How many of us would need to learn these techniques? Marcus asked. Thousands at minimum. Ideally tens of thousands, working in coordinated networks across your entire civilization. The training world has facilities for instructing large numbers of students, but first we need to determine whether humanity as a whole can accept these concepts. James looked up from where he was studying their newly created lake. You're talking about fundamentally changing human civilization. Most people will think we've lost our minds if we try to explain reality shaping to them. Perhaps, the keeper agreed. Or perhaps your species is more adaptable than you believe. The first makers chose to prepare this place specifically for humanity because they perceived certain qualities in your people: creativity, adaptability, and a willingness to embrace impossible solutions when faced with insurmountable challenges. Sarah thought about human history, the countless times her species had faced extinction and survived through innovation and determination. The transition from hunter-gatherers to agriculture, the Industrial Revolution, the Space Age. Each time, humans had reinvented themselves in response to changing circumstances. Maybe they could do it again. What's the next step? She asked. The keeper gestured toward the floating mountains in the distance. Tomorrow, you will learn to communicate across vast distances using quantum entanglement of consciousness. After that, temporal perception manipulation, learning to experience time as a variable rather than a constant. Finally, you will attempt to contact human space and share what you have learned. Contact home, Tommy's eyes lit up. We can actually get word back to Earth. Distance is another construct that consciousness can transcend, the keeper explained. With sufficient focus, you can project your awareness across any distance instantaneously. However, this ability requires absolute precision. The slightest error could scatter your consciousness across multiple dimensions. Sarah felt her stomach drop. You're saying we could die attempting this? Death, life, existence, non-existence, these are all states that consciousness can move between with proper understanding. But yes, the risks are considerable. That is why your final training will focus on maintaining coherent identity across multiple planes of reality. As the alien teacher faded back into the impossible landscape of their training world, Sarah looked around at her team. They'd already achieved things that should have been impossible, learned to bend reality with nothing but focused thought. Tomorrow, they would attempt something even more challenging, reaching across the void to contact their own species. The question was whether humanity would be ready to hear what they had to say. But as she watched Tommy and Marcus excitedly discussing modifications to their lake, and Lisa and James debating the philosophical implications of consciousness-shaped reality, Sarah felt a surge of confidence. If four-stranded humans could learn to reshape matter with their minds, maybe their entire species could adapt to challenges that hadn't even arrived yet. After all, adaptation was what humans did best, even when the adaptation required them to become something more than human. 6 months after being abandoned on an alien world, Sarah Chen stood in the center of a reality-shaping amplification chamber that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, preparing to make contact with human space across 47,000 light-years of distance. The chamber was a masterwork of first-maker technology, a crystalline sphere that existed partially outside normal space-time, designed to focus conscious intent across vast scales of reality. Sarah's team floated in its center, their bodies supported by controlled gravity fields while their consciousness expanded beyond anything they had thought possible. Remember, the keeper's voice reached them through quantum resonance rather than sound waves, you are not sending a message through space. You are becoming temporarily continuous with the consciousness field that underlies all reality. Distance is irrelevant when awareness transcends physical boundaries. Sarah felt her team's minds linking with hers in the complex pattern they'd spent weeks perfecting. Tommy's enthusiasm, Marcus's analytical precision, Lisa's intuitive understanding, and James's deep knowledge combined into something greater than the sum of their individual capabilities. Together, they reached out across impossible distances, searching for the familiar pattern of human thought. The contact, when it came, was like being struck by lightning made of pure information. Suddenly, Sarah was standing in the command center of Europa Station, watching Admiral Patricia Harrison stare at tactical displays showing the catastrophic state of the war with the hegemony. The alien forces had broken through the outer defense lines and were advancing on the core human worlds. Earth itself was under siege. But this wasn't a vision or a recording. This was real-time consciousness projection. Sarah was actually present in the Admiral's office, her awareness temporarily sharing the same space-time coordinates as the military command center. "Admiral Harrison," Sarah said, her voice manifesting through local reality manipulation. The Admiral spun around, her hand reaching for her sidearm. "Who's there?" "Security." "Admiral, my name is Commander Sarah Chen. I was aboard the transport ship Meridian Dawn when it was attacked 6 months ago. I need to speak with you about humanity's defense against the hegemony." Harrison's eyes went wide. "Chen, you're listed as missing, presumed dead. How are you here? This facility is completely secure." Sarah felt the strain of maintaining coherent consciousness across interstellar distances. She had maybe 10 minutes before the effort became too dangerous to sustain. "Admiral, listen carefully. The hegemony isn't the real threat. They're just the first wave. There are entities coming that exist primarily as information patterns, beings that can reshape reality with conscious thought. Conventional weapons won't work against them." "Reality shaping. Commander, are you having some kind of breakdown?" To demonstrate, Sarah reached out with her expanded consciousness and convinced a small portion of the Admiral's desk to temporarily exist as both wood and metal simultaneously. The surface shimmered as it cycled between states, clearly impossible but undeniably real. Harrison stepped backward, her face pale. "What? How did you?" "The beings that destroyed the Meridian Dawn weren't hegemony forces," Sarah continued. "They were advanced scouts for something much worse. Admiral, humanity needs to begin training in consciousness-based reality manipulation immediately, or will be defenseless when the real invasion begins." "This is insane. You're talking about magic." "I'm talking about physics that human science hasn't discovered yet. Admiral, the war with the hegemony is a distraction. Those aliens are being driven from their own territories by the same entities that are coming for us. We need to stop fighting each other and start preparing for the real enemy." Sarah felt her connection beginning to destabilize. The strain of projecting across such distances was enormous, and her team's energy was nearly exhausted. She had time for one final demonstration. Reaching out through the quantum field, she connected with every human consciousness in the Europa Station command center, dozens of officers, technicians, and support staff. For just a moment, she linked them all together in a temporary collective awareness. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every person in the command center suddenly experienced consciousness expansion, feeling their awareness extend beyond individual boundaries. They sensed each other's thoughts, emotions, and memories. More importantly, they felt the vast potential of human consciousness when properly coordinated. The collective awareness lasted only seconds, but it was enough. When Sarah released the connection and her projection began to fade, she left behind a room full of people who had experienced firsthand that reality was far more malleable than they had ever imagined. "The Kepler 442 system," Sarah's voice echoed as her consciousness snapped back across the void. "Send ships there. Send volunteers who are willing to learn. The training facility can handle thousands of students." The projection collapsed, and Sarah found herself back in the crystal chamber, her body racked with exhaustion but her mind blazing with triumph. They had done it. They had made contact with human space and delivered their warning. "Well done," the Keeper said, its multifaceted eyes bright with approval. "Few species achieve such precision in their first attempt at transgalactic consciousness projection. You have successfully initiated the next phase of human development." Tommy was grinning despite his obvious exhaustion. "Did you feel that? We were actually there, 47,000 light-years away, talking to a human admiral in real time." "More than that," Lisa added. "We showed them what's possible. Every person in that command center experienced collective consciousness. They know we weren't hallucinating or playing tricks." James was studying readings from the chamber's monitoring systems. The energy expenditure was incredible. How do the first makers maintain technology that can do this routinely? Practice, the keeper replied simply, and understanding that energy, like matter, is ultimately subject to conscious manipulation. The first makers learned to tap directly into the quantum vacuum, drawing unlimited power from the zero-point field that underlies all existence. Marcus looked up from his own analysis. You mentioned other species. How many civilizations have gone through this training? 17 species have successfully completed the full curriculum, the keeper said. 3 others attempted it, but were unable to adapt their worldview sufficiently to master consciousness-based reality manipulation. They chose to remain on training worlds like this one, living comfortable lives, but never returning to influence their home civilizations. Sarah felt a chill. What happened to those civilizations, the ones whose students failed? They faced the information entities without adequate preparation. Their reality was rewritten according to hostile preferences. Those species no longer exist in any recognizable form. The weight of responsibility settled over Sarah's team like a suffocating blanket. They weren't just learning impossible techniques for their own benefit. They were potentially humanity's only hope against threats that could erase entire civilizations. No pressure, Tommy muttered. Actually, Sarah said, her command instincts kicking in, pressure is exactly what we need. We've proven that humans can learn reality shaping. We've made contact with home and delivered the warning. Now we need to prepare for the next phase. Which is, Marcus asked. Training the trainers, Sarah replied. If thousands of humans are going to learn these techniques, they'll need instructors who understand both the science and the practical applications. That's us. The keeper's form brightened. Commander Chen, your species' adaptability continues to impress. Yes, your next phase of training will focus on teaching methodology. You will learn to guide others through consciousness expansion, to help them overcome the mental barriers that prevent reality perception, and to coordinate large groups in collective reality shaping. How long will that take? James asked. For your level of aptitude, perhaps another 6 months. After that, you will be ready to return to human space and begin preparing your civilization for what is coming. Sarah looked around at her team, 4 humans who had been abandoned on an alien world and had transformed themselves into something unprecedented in human history. They had learned to reshape matter with conscious thought, to project their awareness across galactic distances, and to coordinate their minds into collective consciousness networks. But more importantly, they had learned that humanity was capable of far more than anyone had imagined. When faced with impossible challenges, humans didn't just adapt, they transcended their limitations entirely. Keeper, Sarah said, you mentioned that the information entities won't arrive for another 47 years. That's enough time to train thousands of reality shapers, maybe even enough to transform human civilization itself. If your species proves willing to accept such transformation, not all civilizations embrace change, even when faced with extinction. Sarah thought about Admiral Harrison's reaction, about the brief moment when everyone in the Europa Station Command Center had experienced expanded consciousness. Fear, yes, but also wonder. Humans had always been curious about the unknown, driven to push boundaries and explore new possibilities. They'll adapt, Sarah said with growing conviction. Humans always do. We've survived ice ages, wars, plagues, and the transition to space travel. We'll survive this too, and we'll come out stronger on the other side. The keeper's multifaceted eyes seemed to sparkle with something that might have been hope. The first makers believed your species possessed this quality, the ability to transform existential threats into opportunities for growth. Perhaps their faith was justified. As they prepared to leave the crystal chamber and begin their next phase of training, Sarah felt a profound shift in her understanding of humanity's place in the universe. They weren't just another species struggling to survive in a hostile cosmos. They were potentially the universe's newest reality shapers, consciousness architects who could help protect other civilizations from threats that existed beyond the reach of conventional physics. It was a staggering responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity. The choice that Captain Morrison had made 6 months ago, the decision to send them to this impossible world rather than let them die with his ship, had set in motion changes that could reshape not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. One choice had indeed turned the tide, but not in the way any of them could have imagined. Sarah's team hadn't just survived abandonment on an extraterrestrial world. They had used it as a launching point to become something greater than human. And they were just getting started. In the distance, the floating mountains of the first makers continued their eternal dance, maintaining impossible physics through the power of focused consciousness. Soon, Sarah thought, human minds would be doing the same among the stars, protecting Earth and its colonies with abilities that transcended the limitations of matter and energy. The war with the hegemony would end, one way or another, but humanity's real adventure as architects of reality itself was just beginning. After all, when you could reshape the universe with conscious thought, even the impossible became just another engineering problem waiting to be solved. And humans, Sarah had learned, were very good at solving impossible problems.